Kelvin Robinson, and one of the commentators on here has called me out for saying that Tommy Robinson doesn't incite violence. He only encourages anger. Well, it's not entirely true. And the problem is that Tommy Robinson and Andrew Tate have a background together which is incendiary. And therefore, neither of them really needs to do very much. A nod and a wink is all they need to incite violence. Now, it may not be what they intend, but it's how their winking is understood by their fan base, and that is the problem. Both Tommy Robinson, Stephen Yaxley Lennon, and Andrew Tate have been controversial figures both with a history of inflammatory rhetoric, but it's important to differentiate between allegations of inciting violence and actual legal judgments or clear instances of such behaviour. And that really is the problem. So you might say, oh yes, there might be a trope in social media saying Tommy Robinson is inciting violence, or Farage is inciting violence, but proving that is very different, because it's not necessarily what they say, it's how they are understood. Because they are no longer individual people responsible for their actions and their words. They have become the bigger person. I've been saying this now passionately, I hope, for a good 2 or 3 months. And I've been comparing Tommy Robinson and Tate and Farage with Julius Caesar, with particularly one of my favourite exam questions, which is Julius Caesar dead is more powerful than Julius Caesar alive. Tate and Robinson particularly, and Farage, have all started something that is associated with their name, which is bigger than they are. So pursuing Tommy Robinson to try and arrest him, to try and stop this now, is an impossibility. Tommy Robinson is the genie out of the bottle. That's not Tommy Robinson, the man sunning himself on a deck chair in Crete or Cyprus or wherever he is. Who cares? Tommy Robinson has been widely criticised for his anti-Muslim rhetoric, which some argue could incite violence or hatred against Muslims. For example, in various speeches and social media posts, he has referred to Muslims in dehumanizing terms and has promoted the idea that Islam is inherently violent. While these statements have been condemned as inflammatory, there have been no specific instances where he has been legally charged with directly inciting violence. Of course not. As the founder of the English Defence League, a far-right organisation known for its anti-Islam stance, Robinson led numerous demonstrations that often resulted in violent clashes. Critics argue that his leadership and rhetoric contributed to an environment of hostility and violence, but again, direct calls for violence are not clearly documented in legal terms. And what I know of Tommy Robinson from people who know him personally is that he's a nice person. And that there's a difference between the Tommy Robinson that you might meet for a cup of tea and the Tommy Robinson who has become this genie out of the bottle. Has he incited violence? He's understood to have done so. Has he said so? No. And there's a difference. Robinson has made several social media posts that have been accused of stirring up racial or religious tensions, absolutely, though these have often been framed as free speech or political commentary rather than explicit calls for violence, in the same way as Farage has used questions rather than explicit calls for violence. But it's how these expressions are understood, not what they, not how they are intended or how they are actually made. Andrew Tate, the misogynistic statements, criticised for his highly misogynistic remarks, which some interpret as encouraging violence against women. For example, he's made comments suggesting that women should be controlled or that men should have a right to dominate women. And while these remarks have been widely condemned, they do not constitute direct calls for violence in a legal sense. His promotion of this toxic masculinity, this hyper-masculine lifestyle, which often includes aggressive behaviour, has been linked to encouraging a culture that might condone violence. However, there's no documented cases, as far as I know, where he has explicitly called for violence against individuals or groups. So similarly to Robinson's, Tate's social media presence has been marked by provocative statements, and some of these statements have been interpreted as inciting harmful behaviour, but they generally fall into a grey area of rhetoric rather than clear legal violations. But that is the problem. Again, Andrew Tate has become a genie. This has been let out of the bottle. And he is no longer in control. It doesn't mean Andrew Tate and Farage and Tommy Robinson should get out and should speak clearly, condemning this violence, encouraging peace. Actually, condemning violence isn't what we need now. There's plenty of people condemning it. What we need is these three individuals with such extraordinary power to stand up and make some sort of positive contribution about peace, about reaching out across the divides. Both Tommy Robinson and Tate have been criticised for the rhetoric that could be interpreted as inciting violence or creating a climate of hostility. But direct, explicit calls to violence, that's much harder to find. It's understood, but it's harder to identify legally. And these legal consequences are not these legal consequences don't exist. But, what is documented has led to violence. But can it be traced back directly to things that have been said by Tommy Robinson, by Andrew Tate, by Nigel Farage? Probably not. Their influence is often seen in the broader social impact of their rhetoric, which has contributed to environments where violence or aggressive behaviour might be more likely. The councillor, the Labour council yesterday, who talked about throat slitting, appalling. Did he mean it? Well, probably not. And that's the contrast. There we've got an example of somebody who has used violent language, which he didn't mean, in contrast to three people who don't use violent language or who haven't used violent language that we know, but where their language is interpreted in a violent sense by their followers. I mean, don't get me wrong in any way. I don't condone the Labour councillor. And the case now is before the law court, so it's not for me to get involved in that. But I certainly wouldn't condone any calls for violence at all, on any side. Violence begets violence, and letting that genie out of the bottle, you're no longer in control of how it's understood. It's like gossip. You can't pick up the gossip that you have sown. It spreads. And the problem with violence and with evil in general, as we know from Putin, is it spreads and it emerges all over the place. You only have to come into contact with it, and you are infected with this evil and with this violence. And it infects, both sides in a clash. Both sides. I mean, you might say this is where it comes from, but you can't be sure. Because by the time you are infected, it's no longer attributed to any one individual. But those one individuals can help to stop it. And these three are not doing so. These three are effectively keeping quiet. They've let the genie out of the bottle. They're making no effort to put it back. and that is sad. I think it's partly to do with their base. Trump is the same. Partly to do with their base, partly to do with not losing face, partly because they've got nothing else to offer. And so if they climb down, that's a loss of identity. Their social impact is enormous. And in the case of all three of the people I've mentioned today, Farage, Tate, and Robinson, they have enormous charisma. And I know, I use this word, and I know there's going to be people who are going to be pottering on and saying, the word charisma means somebody who is liked. I don't use it in that sense at all. I use it in the sense that they have this sort of magical appeal, this grace, which has got nothing to do with it's got nothing to do with whether or not they are liked or disliked, whether they've got something interesting to say. It's about their charisma or charisma, because the Greek word has got an accent on the second letter on the alpha. Charisma, a favor freely given, and it's a really strange concept. It's about having this, being touched by this favor, being touched by this spiritual experience, this gift, and Max Weber coined the idea of people being charismatic, and this sense of people having this quality, this individual personality he talked of, by which people are treated as endowed with superhuman, supernatural, or exceptionally noted powers or qualities that are not accessible to ordinary people, that are regarded as of divine or spiritual or demonic origin, and that people are considered or treated differently because they are empowered with this gift. And these three individuals have it. Now, they may not be using it very well, but they definitely have this extraordinary leadership quality, and people listen to them. How they are understood, that's another matter, and that's really the issue.